Hello, welcome to the Voice of Democracy podcast. I am your host, Bruce Carter. In this podcast, you will hear intriguing and thoughtful interviews as well as actual tips, strategies that can be implemented either in your institution, health and wellness, and education. Our podcast is not by name recognition or being famous. Everyone has untapped potential. In today's fast-changing landscapes demands nation leaders who can quickly adapt, build trust, and deliver value. Through people and technology, we're listening and providing insight on tough political and business challenges, including talent, transformation, geopolitical conflicts, pandemics, and social injustice. In this podcast series, Voice of Democracy offers insights to help you take today's challenges and prepare for tomorrow. Through social change, we will be the voice of democracy, American promise, global mission. Thanks for spending time with us today. Now, let's jump to your daily dose of Voice of Democracy. Today's highlight will focus on U.S. immigration gateway. First, let me open by saying a 1790 law was the first to specify who could become a citizen, limiting the privilege to free whites of good moral character who had lived in the U.S. for at least 2 years. In 1870, the right of citizenship was extended to those of the African origin. Starting in 1875, a series of restrictions on immigration were enacted. They included ban of criminals, people with contagious diseases, polygamists, antichrists, baggers, and importers of prostitutions. Other restrictions target the rising number of Asian immigrants, first limiting migration from China and later banning immigration from most Asian countries. Moving into 1790 Naturalization Act, excluded non-white people from eligibility to naturalization. Naturalization requirements included 2 years of residence in the country and good moral character. An applicant must be free of white person. The Naturalization Act of 1795 extended the residence of requirements to 5 years. In 1798, this was extended to 14 years, then back to 5 in 1802. The 19th century witnessed significant waves of immigration to the United States, driven by factors such as industrialization, urbanization, and political upheaval in Europe. Millions of immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Eastern Europe arrived in search of better opportunities and freedom from persecution. The construction of transcontinental railroads and expansion of agriculture lands further fueled immigration to the American West. There was something called the Great Wave of Immigration. The late 19th and earlier 20th centuries saw the largest wave of immigration in the U.S. history, known as the Great Wave. During this period, millions of Americans from Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as Asia, arrived in the United States. They sought refuge from poverty, religions, persecution, and political instability in their home countries. Ellis Island and Angel Island serve as major immigration processing centers where immigrants underwent medical examination and legal inspection before entering the country. So, let's get started. The United States began regulating immigration soon after it won independence from Great Britain, and the laws since enacted have reflected the political and migratory flows of the times. Early legislation tended to impose limits that favored Europeans, but a sweeping 1965 law opened doors to immigrants from other parts of the world. In more recent years, laws or presidential actions have been shaped by concerns about refugees, unauthorized immigrations, and terrorism. By the early 1900s, the nation's predominant immigration flows shifted away from Northern and Western European nations and towards Southern and Eastern Europe. In response, laws were passed in 1921 and 1924 to try to restore early immigration patterns by capping total annual immigration and imposing numerical quotas based on immigrant nationality that favored Northern and Western European countries. Long-standing immigration restrictions began to crumble in 1943 when a law allowed a limited number of Chinese to immigrate. In 1952, legislation allowed a limited number of visas for other countries, such as Asians, and race was formally removed as grounds of exclusion. Although a presidential commission recommended scrapping the nationality origins quota system, Congress did not go along. In 1965, though a combination of political, social, and geopolitical factors led to passage of the landmark Immigration and Nationality Act that created a new system favoring family reunification skilled immigrants rather than country quotas, the law also imposed the first limits of immigration from the Western Hemisphere. Before then, Latin America had been allowed to enter the U.S. without many restrictions. Since enacting the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, immigration has been dominated by people born in Asia and Latin America rather than Europe. Several laws since then have focused on refugees, paving the way for interests of Indo-Chinese refugees fleeing war violence in the 1970s and later including relief for other nationalities, including Chinese, Nicaraguans, and Haitians. A 1990 law created the temporary protected status that has shielded immigrants, many Central Americans, from deportation of countries facing natural disasters, armed conflicts, or other extraordinary conditions. In 1986, Congress enacted another major law, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, that granted legalization to millions of unauthorized immigrants, mainly from Latin America, who met certain conditions. The law also imposed sanctions on employers who hired unauthorized immigrants. Subsequent laws in 1996, 2002, and 2006 were a response to a concern about terrorism and unauthorized immigration. These measures emphasize border control, prioritize enforcement of laws and hiring immigrants, and tighten admission eligibility. The most recent changes in immigration policy have been an exception to that pattern. In 2012, President Barack took executive action to allow young adults who had been brought to the country illegally to apply for deportation relief and work permit. In 2014, he expanded that program, known as Deferred Action for Children Arrival, or better known as DACA, and set up a new program to offer similar benefits to some unauthorized immigrants, parents of U.S.-born children. The DACA expansion in the new program, Deferred Action and Parent Americans Lawful Permanent Resident, or DAPA, are on hold because of legal challenges by 26 states. Real quick, focus on the 1800s. 1800 immigrants has played an important role in American history, and the United States continues to have the most open immigrant policy in the world. Before the era of rapid communications and transportation, America encouraged relative open immigration to settle its empty lands. After certain states passed immigration laws following the Civil War, the Supreme Court in 1876 declared the regulation of immigration to be federal responsibility. Legislation in 1891 and 1895 created the Bureau of Immigrations. Moving back in between 1900s to 1950s. From 1900 to 1920, nearly 24 million immigrants arrived during what is known as the Great Wave, as I previously stated. The outbreak of World War I reduced immigration from Europe, but mass immigration resumed upon the war's conclusion, and Congress responded with a new immigration policy. The National Origins Quota System passed in 1921 and revised in 1924. Immigration was limited by assigning each nationality a quota based on its representation in past U.S. Census figures. This quota favored immigrants from Northwestern Europe in particular. Congress also created a U.S. Border Patrol within the Bureau of Immigration in 1924. There was very little immigration over the next 20 years, with net immigration actually dropping below zero for several years during the Depression. Immigration remained relatively low during the 20 years following the World War II because 1920 is a national origins system remained in place after Congress recodified, and recombined all previous immigration and naturalization law into the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. American agriculture continued to import seasonal labor from Mexico, as they had during the war, under a 1951 formal agreement between the United States and Mexico that made the program permanent, which was called Bracero Program. 1960 through 1965, Congress replaced the national origin system with a preference system designed to unite immigrant families and attract skilled immigrants to the United States. The bill drastically shifted the source countries of immigrants away from Northwestern Europe. The majority of applicants for immigration visas in the following decades started coming from Asia and Latin America rather than Europe. As a result of this legislation, the number of immigrants arriving each year would more than triple from approximately 320,000 in the 1960s to over 1 million per year by the 21st century. Moving to the 1980s, the preference system continued to limit the number of immigrants visas available each year. However, Congress still responded to refugees with special legislation. Not until the Refugee Act of 1980 did the United States have a general policy governing the admission of refugees. In 1986, Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. This legislation had two major facets: amnesty and enforcement. The IRCA provided amnesty to aliens who had completed one or two stipulations. They had resided continually in the U.S. since January 1982, or they had completed 90 days of agricultural work between May 1985 and May of 1986. The acceptance rate for amnesty applicants was about 94%, eventually giving legal status to approximately 3 million. It is estimated that 1/4 of the cases accepted were fraudulent. In 2000s, the IRCA was extended through late amnesty, which allowed those fighting their original denial to reapply. As of June 2007, 15,000 late amnesty cases are still pending from IRCA. The 1986 legislation also contained enforcement provisions to prevent future legal entry. The provision prohibit the hiring and harboring of illegal aliens, but few resources were allocated to enforce these laws. Poor funding essentially tied to hands enforcement officials. This created a lopsided grand compromise that fueled later generations of illegal aliens. Moving over to the 1990s. In the 1990s, Congress again reformed immigration statutes. The 1990 Immigration Act modified and expanded the 1965 Act. It significantly increased the total level of immigrations to 700,000, increasing available visas 40%. The Act retained family reunifications as a major entry path, while more than doubling employment-related immigration. The law also provided for the admission of immigrants from unrepresented countries to increase the diversity of immigrants flow by creating a lottery system. The 1990 Act also mandated a study of immigration, later known as the Jordan Commission. The U.S. Commission of Immigration Reform, named after its chairman, former Representative Barbara Jordan, ran from 1990 to 1997. The commission covered many facets of immigration policy, but started from the perception that the credibility of immigration policy can be measured by a simple yardstick. People who should get in do get in. People who should not get in are kept out. And people who are judged deportable are required to leave. From there, in a series of 4 reports, the commission looked at all aspects of immigration policy. And at first, it found that enforcement was lax and needed improvement on the border and internally. For internal enforcement, it recommended that an automated employment verification system be created to enable workers to distinguish between legal and illegal workers. The second report discussed legal immigration issues and suggested that immediate family members and skilled workers receive priority. The third report covered refugee and asylum issues. Finally, the fourth report reiterated the major points of the previous reports and the need for a new immigration policy. Few of these suggestions were implemented. In 1996, Congress passed the Illegal Immigrant Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. The act added to border controls by mandating the hiring of more border patrol and immigration and naturalization service agents. Repercussions for entering the country illegally were increased, and a border fence was planned for San Diego. An automated employment verification pilot program was created in the hopes of easing worksite enforcement. The act also allowed state police officers to enforce immigration law using the 287 Golf program. Although the IRA boosted de jure enforcement, poor funding again hindered the actual enforcement of the laws. Also during the 1990s, Congress passed a series of 4 smaller amnesties. The first, the Section 245 India amnesty, was passed in 1994 and pardoned approximately 578,000 illegal aliens who were each fined $1,000. This amnesty was later renewed in 1997 and again in 2000. The second, the Nicaraguan Adjustment and Central America Relief Act, was passed in 1997 and gave legal status to approximately 1 million illegal aliens, mostly from Central America, who have lived in the U.S. since 1995. In 1998, the Haitian Refugee Immigration and Fairness Act passed after it was argued that excluding Haitians from the Nicaraguan Act was discriminatory. So moving on to the 2000s. The most recent amnesty passed in 2000 was the Legal Immigration Family Equity Act, known as LIFE. The LIFE Act was many amnesties aimed at those illegal aliens who hope to become green card holders through marriage, employment, or other categories, but who were not anywhere near approval yet due to the long line of people ahead of them. It was sold as a very around way to show the growing processing backlogs that were the results of previous amnesties. During the time of this legislation, from 1994 to 2000, millions of hopeful legal immigrants waited in line overseas. The terrorist attack in September 11, 2001 sharply affected the public's perspective of immigration. A total of 20 foreign-born terrorists were involved, 19 of whom took part in an attack that caused 2,974 civilian deaths. The terrorists had entered the country on tourist or student visas. 4 of them, however, had violated the terms of their visas and became illegal aliens. The attack exposed long-standing holes in our immigration system that included failures at a visa processing, internal enforcement, and in information sharing. In 2006, the issue of immigration reform was once again discussed in Congress, with the House of Representatives and the Senate producing conflicting bills. In December of 2005, the House passed the Border Protection, Anti-Terrorist, and Illegal Immigration Control Act of 2005, which was sponsored by Representative James Sensenbrenner, a Republican from Wisconsin. The act was limited to enforcement and focused on both the border and the interior. In the Senate, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2006 was sponsored by Senator Arlene Spitzer, Republican of Pennsylvania, and passed in May of 2006. The Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act would have given amnesty to a majority of illegal aliens already in the country, as well as dramatically increase legal immigration. Although the bills passed their respective chambers, no comprehensive bill emerged. In 2007, the Senate again attempted to pass the amnesty legislation, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2007, which will have given a path to citizenship to the large majority of illegal entrants in the country, significantly increased legal immigration, and increased enforcement. The act, which had bipartisan support in the Senate, was widely unpopular with the American public. As a result of the unprecedented public pressure, the bill failed to pass. A cloture vote, essentially killing it. Moving over to the 2010s, despite the promise of passing a major immigration bill during the first year in office, President Obama's first major act of immigration came in August 2012. The president announced an executive order entitled Deferred Action for Children for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, which resulted in a renewable 2-year grants of protection from deportation, plus work permits and identity documents for approximately 700,000 legal aliens who arrived in the country as children. In 2013, the bipartisan group of 8 senators known as the Gang of Eight drafted a major piece of amnesty legislation titled the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act in 2013, which would have provided a path to citizenship for approximately 11 million illegal aliens in the country, including the DACA recipients. The bill sought to drastically increase the size of visa programs, including lifting the high-skilled H-1B visa cap from 65,000 to as high as 180,000 per year, depending upon demand, and creating a new W visa for an additional 200,000 low-skilled workers. In exchange, the bill promised increased border security and mandatory e-verify for all employers. Despite passing the Senate 68 to 32, the bill saw significant grassroots resistance, was not considered by the House, and died in the 113th Congress. The following year, President Obama announced an additional executive order entitled Deferred Action for Parents of America, DAPA, in November 2014. This will have granted 3-year renewal work permits and exemption from a deportation to illegal aliens with children who are American citizens or lawfully permanent residents. Approximately 3.6 million aliens would have been eligible. However, multiple states filed lawsuits against the federal government, and a temporary injunction in February 2015 blocked Deferred Action for Parents of America from going into effect while the lawsuit proceeded. In 2016, the presidential election saw Donald Trump win an unexpected victory, with immigration at the forefront of his campaign message. On the campaign trail, President Trump made a wide range of promises regarding immigration. Among those promises, build a border wall and make Mexico pay for it, deport all illegal aliens, defund sanctuary cities, ban Muslims from entering the United States, limit legal immigration, and a triple number of ICE agents. President Trump's hardline immigration stance won him favor with the conservative base, leading him to upset the 16 other major Republican candidates in the primary race, such as Jeb Bush, who received over $100,000 million from donors but faced significant grassroots backlash for his perceived softer stance on illegal immigration. President Trump went on to defeat Hillary Clinton in the general election while standing by his views on immigration. After inauguration, President Trump made varying degrees of progress on his campaign trail immigration pledges. In 2017, he signed several executive orders. He signed a travel ban which restricted admission to the citizens of what was ultimately 7 countries: Libya, Iran, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, North Korea, and Venezuela. Chad was included in the final executive order but removed from the list the following year, banning over 135 million potential immigrants and non-immigrant visitors. Trump also rescinded the DAPA order in June. Lastly, during that time in June of 2017, lastly in September of that time, he announced plans to phase out DACA, making the potential recipient eligible for deportation. In the following year, 2017 to 2018, Congress attempted to pass several pieces of amnesty legislation which would have preserved DACA, a bill sponsored by Representative Bob Goodlatte, Republican of Virginia, which would have provided a path for citizenship to DACA recipients in exchange for a border wall and significant reductions to family based on chain migrants failed in the House after gathering 193 votes, with their 41 Republicans and 190 Democrats in opposition. A week later, an even larger amnesty bill, backed by Paul Ryan at the time and the party leadership, went down in flames, earning just 121 votes in the House. That bill would have provided amnesty to over 2 million illegal aliens while preserving the largest chain migration categories. The fate of DACA, as we know it now, remains uncertain. A federal judge ruled during that time period earlier that year that the program must resume processing new applicants, and a Supreme Court ruling is expected to come later this year to decide the program's ultimate fate. However, with the new president in office, President Joe Biden, the immigration policy are still uncertain. In closing, today, the United States remains a nation of immigrants, with the millions of people from around the world making the journey to seek better life. However, immigration continues to be a contentious issue, with debates over border security, undocumented immigration, and the fate of DACA recipients. As the country grapples with these challenges, it is essential to reflect on the rich and the complex history of the immigration that has shaped the United States into a diverse and dynamic nation. The history of immigration in the United States is a story of resilience, diversity, and adaptation. From the early settlers to the present-day immigrants, people from all corners of the globe have contributed to the rich tapestry of American society. By understanding the historical context of immigration, we can better appreciate the challenges and the opportunities that has lied ahead in the United States, continues to navigate its immigration policies and practice in the 21st century. Thank you for listening today. This podcast was brought to you by the People First Consulting, Voice of Democracy. For more information about People First Consulting, Voice of Democracy, please visit our website, www.pfcworks.com. American Promise, Global Mission. Thank you for tuning in and listening today. Until next time, please be safe, stay informed, and live well.